Okay, I'm going to start this morning by officially welcoming everyone. Sawadee Kap. Welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to those of you that are here at the temple, and welcome to everyone online who's joining us. Today is what we call our Pali Canon and English study group, and we study the words of the Buddha to help you guys understand the teachings that the Buddha shared during his lifetime and help you get to the enlightened mental state where the mind can be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, where you'll no longer experience any discontent feelings. So all the anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, boredom, loneliness, shyness, resentment, jealousy, all of that is eliminated from the enlightened mind by the time you train your mind to get to this enlightened mental state. And meditation is an important part of that. So we start our class with meditation, and then afterwards we'll move into sharing some teachings with you guys. So let me just help you get started with some meditation. I'm going to start with some chanting to ease us into meditation. We have Pali chants that have been handed down throughout the generations. The language that the original teachings of the Buddha are in the Pali language. So we chant in this Pali language. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they used chanting as a way to commit the teachings to memory. And this is how they were able to then practice the teachings, because he spoke orally, teaching the teachings, and then they would recite the teachings every 2 weeks. They would recite them word for word for word. We don't need to chant in order to remember the teachings anymore. Instead, we do it in order to ease the mind into meditation and get more benefit out of the meditation itself. If you read the English translations of the chants, you can see there's a lot of admiration and respect for the Buddha. I don't think that he actually created these chants himself. They were probably created by his students, either during his life or after his death, because a Buddha doesn't go around teaching people to chant to him, right? This would be the ego or arrogance or pride if he did that. But instead, if you learned from a teacher who helped you move from the sadness, anger, and frustration and all those other feelings to the peace and the joy of the enlightened mental state, you'd probably have a lot of gratitude and respect for that person too, because he didn't want anything from his students. He didn't expect anything of his students. He didn't ask for anything from his students. So he just helped out of the compassion of his heart to be able to share the teachings in a way that would help others to be able to experience this mental state that he attained on his own. So I start the meditation with this chanting. I'll go into the meditation with the chanting, and you're welcome to chant along if you like. And then after we do the chanting, then I'll give you some guidance on the meditation itself to help you learn how to actually meditate. And then there'll be a period of time where it'll just be quiet and we'll all be meditating together. Those of us here and everyone online will just be meditating together. Of course, you'll hear an occasional car or dog or a bird chirp or something like that, but you'll hear in the meditation how you can bring your mind back to the breath and not be affected by that. So after that period of time where we're all meditating together, then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting and kind of ease the mind out. In terms of how you can position the body for meditation, there's 4 positions that the Buddha taught: seated, lying, standing, and walking. And in this particular situation where people are first learning, the seated position is very common to learn, either sitting on the floor or sitting in a chair, really sitting anywhere that you feel comfortable. Just to give you a couple of pointers on the body that can help you to get comfortable is that if you're on the floor, usually you just like to cross your legs lightly. If you cross them real tight, the circulation will be inhibited, and this will cause pain in the body, and you're not interested in that pain occurring. So if you just have your legs lightly crossed, that'll usually work out best. Some people like to put their legs off the mat. This gets the hips up in the air and lessens the angle at the hips, the knees, and the ankles, and kind of makes it more comfortable. So you could even try that if you like. The hands and the arms, the Buddha put his right hand over his left with his thumbs together, and he put this into his lap. If this is comfortable, you could do this, but this practice isn't about everybody doing it exactly the same way. It's about finding what's comfortable for you. So you could put your palms on your thighs or your knees or your palms up, or you could put your hands in your lap. It's whatever's comfortable for you with the lower body and the hands and arms. The upper body should be erect. This keeps the mind attentive and alert during the meditation, whereas if you were slouched, the mind would have a tendency to be dull or lethargic. But if you were real rigid, the mind would be overactive and uptight. So you'd like to have the upper body erect where the mind can be attentive and alert during the meditation. And this will give you the ability to actively train the mind. So as I mentioned, I'm going to ease into meditation with chanting, and then afterwards I'll come back with some guidance. You guys are welcome to chant along if you like. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวะมนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathe in gradually through the nose establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath. Either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเขวาพุทธังมหาเขวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเขวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนับโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามานุสรังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. So once again, I'd like to welcome all of you guys that are here at the temple and everyone joining us online. Welcome to all of you guys. It's nice to see you here this morning to be able to learn the teachings of the Buddha. And for those of you guys that this is your first time here at the temple, I'd like to just share some things to help you be comfortable here in this space. Is that in the very last door on the right in the back, there's a bathroom. At any time, if you'd like to use the restroom, you're welcome to help yourself and use the restroom. There's even restrooms outside the classroom. If you follow the main signs around, there's a large temple bathroom in the back of the temple. And then we even have water here that's provided by our students that you're welcome to enjoy the water, make yourself comfortable as you learn today. So this meditation that I did with you is called breathing mindfulness meditation. This is a primary form of training that the Buddha used, among other things, in order to move his mind to the enlightened mental state. The chanting that we do, this isn't a rite or ritual or a ceremony or worship. This isn't any prayer or anything like that. The teachings of the Buddha aren't about believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. Instead, you're learning teachings now, you're investigating them, you're examining them, you're reflecting on them to independently verify whether they're true or they're false, and then you're practicing these teachings to uproot certain pollutions that the Buddha discovered in your mind. He discovered that the unenlightened mind has these 10 individual pollutions, and when you understand what these are and you uproot them out of the mind, this is where the enlightened mind shines through. You'll start seeing this brightness and this radiance, this clarity, concentration, the peace and joy comes into the mind to the point where you're not even in a bad mood anymore by the time you get to enlightenment, because you've uprooted the causes and conditions that are producing the bad mood to occur. So you do that through investigating teachings, through reflecting on them to verify that they're true, and then practicing them. And then you get wisdom. You acquire wisdom about what we refer to as the natural laws of existence, the natural laws around you, that these natural laws are affecting you whether you're aware of it or not. So as you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, it's important that you're always looking to cultivate wisdom. Today in our class, this is called the Pali Canon in English Study Group, and we study the original words of the Buddha. Oftentimes before somebody has come to a class like this, they've developed a foundation in the teachings of the Buddha, learning either in our group learning program, which is on Sunday and Wednesday, or they've taken one of our foundational courses or things like that. But brand new students come here too, and you're definitely going to learn something today if this is your first time here. But just understand this isn't typical where someone will just start out, particularly with the book that we're studying today. We're studying volume 11 of the book series, and it's volume 11 for a reason. Because usually students will approach this topic about 1.5 years, 2 years into their development on the path to enlightenment. This book is titled The Realms of Existence. This is where you're learning about the cycle of rebirth. And even the cycle of rebirth, it's not something to ever believe in. You can independently verify that the cycle of rebirth is true. Right now, you might not have the wisdom to know how to do that, but you can actually independently verify that the teachings are true. The Buddha didn't just slip in the cycle of rebirth and teach something that isn't actually true. Everything that he taught it based on his own experiences. So he was able to observe his past lives in these various realms. He was able to communicate with beings in all these different realms. And there's ability to see these beings as well. And not only the Buddha can do this, but other beings have been able to do this. Even today, there's people that have these same experiences. So what the Buddha is teaching you is not the way that the world should be. He's teaching you the way the world is. So part of the way the world is he's explaining to you the cycle of rebirth so that you know the way the world is. So that if you start observing past lives, you're not shaken up by that. Or if you start experiencing communication with beings in other realms, you're not shaken up by that. Or if you happen to visually see some of these beings, you're not shaken up by that. But if you didn't understand the way the world is, you could be shaken up by those kind of situations where you're starting to observe past lives. Maybe you have vivid memories of a murder and it appears that this was you that was being murdered. Maybe in your dreams or in your daily life, these memories are surfacing, and you might be shaken up by that if you didn't understand that these are past lives, and you can just set it to the side and no need to be shaken up by that. Or if you start noticing communication with these beings in these other realms, because while we talk about them as realms, they're not like in a far distant place. They're like right here in the same time and space as you. Just like there's human beings that are sitting here, there could be animals that come in here and sit as well. Just like hell beings, afflicted spirits, and heavenly beings as well. These beings all are in the same time and space. So if you started experiencing communication with these beings and you didn't understand that this is the way the world is, you could be shaken up by that. Or if you saw these beings, you can actually see some of these beings, even though they're formless beings. There's some people who can see hell beings or afflicted spirits or heavenly beings. And again, you'd be shaken up by that. So the teachings of the Buddha, as you're eliminating this pollution out of the mind and the mind's moving to this higher consciousness, you might experience some of these things. Not everybody does, but some people do. So that's one of the reasons why he's teaching the cycle of rebirth, or 3 of the reasons why he's teaching the cycle of rebirth, because you can experience vivid memories of the past, you can experience communication with these beings, or even see these beings. So what we do in this program is we have the original words of the Buddha in this book series titled The Words of the Buddha, Revealing the Hidden, the path to Enlightenment. This particular book series that I share, I have excerpts of the words of the Buddha where you can see what he actually taught. And what we've been exploring so far is we've been exploring all the different realms. We've already explored in this particular book the hell realm, the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, the human realm, and now we're in the heavenly realm. We've been exploring that. Again, this isn't where somebody will typically start in their journey to enlightenment. Usually the cycle of rebirth is something you approach about 1.5 years, 2 years into your development, because there's the core central teachings that you need to focus on to help you uproot the pollutions out of the mind. That's really where somebody would start. The cycle of rebirth, you can really set it to the side when you're first getting started, because what's happened in the past, it's in the past. It doesn't matter anymore right now. And what may or may not happen in the future, it's in the future. It's not happened yet. What's important is right now you're in this human realm. Your mind is experiencing discontent feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and other discontent feelings, and you need to eliminate those. So I encourage people to focus on the core central teachings of the Buddha, which are like the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, meditation training, things like this. And then as your mind is starting to become more awake, you've cultivated wisdom, you're getting more and more pollution out of the mind, then a year and a half, 2 years in, you're probably going to be at least getting close to book 11 of the book series, and that's the time to usually approach this. But since you guys are here, you'll surely learn something. I'll relate it to helping you to understand what it is that the Buddha is teaching you. The way that we do this program is I invite volunteers to read the chapter. Either those of you guys here or those of you guys in Zoom, you can read these chapters, and these chapters are quite short. You can see this one's not even a page long. So what we do is I invite students to volunteer to read the chapter, and then after somebody reads it, I will share for about 5 or 10 minutes on that chapter to help you understand it and reflect on it. The Buddha's words are very clear, very concise, very precise. You don't really need me to help you understand his individual words, but there's sometimes teachings that he teaches that are connected to other teachings. And if you haven't explored those other teachings yet, you kind of need a tour guide to walk you through and understand those other teachings, and then help you to understand how to benefit from a particular teaching and implement it into your life. So this is more of a study group fashion of learning, where all the other classes and courses and retreats that I teach, it's more of a traditional style of learning where I'll be teaching for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and I'll open up to questions. Then I teach for 15, 20, 30 minutes, open up for questions. But this is more of a study group where students come to kind of study the teachings. And sometimes they read the chapters before class or sometimes after class. So these books are all available for you at no cost. You can download them from our website. You can take them and go print them if you like. We have printed versions here that people just reimburse us for our printing cost, or they're also available on Amazon.com as well, where you can get them from there as well. So is there anybody here, anybody online through Zoom that would like to volunteer to read this particular chapter? Yes, sir. Siddharth's going to read for us.
Fruits from residing in formless perceptions and considering impermanence. Here, with the complete overcoming of perceptions of forms, with the passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, perceiving space is infinite, a monk enters and resides in the base of the infinity of space. He considers whatever objects exist there related to feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices or decisions, and consciousness as impermanent, discontentedness, an illness, a boil, a dart, misery, affliction, alien, disintegrating, empty, and non-self. He turns his mind away from those objects and directs it to the deathless element enlightenment does. This is peaceful, this is superb, that is, the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all material gain, the destruction of craving, freedom from strong feelings, elimination, nibbana, enlightenment. If he is firm in this, he attains the destruction of the taints fetters. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints because of that craving for the teachings, because of that excitement in the teachings, then with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he becomes one of spontaneous birth, due to attain final nibbana, final enlightenment there without ever returning from that world. Just as an archer or an archer's apprentice undergoes training on a straw man or a heap of clay, and then at a later time becomes a long-distance shooter, a sharp shooter, one who splits a great body. In reference to the base of infinite consciousness and the base of nothingness, identical teachings to the base of infinite space were spoken. The cases of first, second, third, and fourth jhana were spoken, but the difference is to see impermanence in the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness.
Okay, thank you, Siddharth. So this is actually quite an involved teaching that requires a lot of understanding of different teachings. You can see it's for those of you guys that maybe this is the first time you've seen the words of the Buddha, this is like very detailed, very complex teaching that you need to know a lot of other things before you would understand this. So I'm going to summarize this for you in a way that we don't have to dive into all the individual details. Unless somebody would like to understand and ask questions about the details, we can go into that. But here, what I'm going to share with you is what the Buddha is teaching you is that there's these certain attainments that the mind experiences. There's what we call the first, second, third, and fourth jhana. These are preliminary phases that the mind experiences on your way to the first stage of enlightenment. That there's this first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment. And the mind is actually enlightened when it gets to the fourth stage. But there's these other attainments, these other mental qualities that you experience that are preliminary phases that the mind goes through on its way to the first stage of enlightenment. And the Buddha is describing the jhanas here. He's also describing, or at least mentioning, these other attainments like, where is it at? He's got it here. Here it is, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and things like this, the base of infinite space. These are other attainments that the Buddha teaches in addition to the jhanas. And what he's essentially saying is that in order for you to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to experience these attainments. In terms of the jhanas, everybody who's going to make their way to enlightenment will experience the 4 jhanas. But these other attainments, not everybody experiences all of these attainments. And I describe these various attainments and what they are in other parts of the book series. What some of these attainments are is like being able to see your past lives. Some people will see their past lives. Some people won't on their way to enlightenment. But there's ways to confirm the cycle of rebirth beyond just observing your past lives. So the Buddha is describing that you would need to experience these attainments in order to make your way to enlightenment. But not everybody's going to experience these space of infinite space or some of these other ones that the Buddha is talking about. But the jhanas you definitely will experience. Here he's talking about, in order to experience this, you need to be able to see that what we call the 5 aggregates are impermanent, their discontentedness, and there's what's called non-self. These are the 3 universal truths. What the 5 aggregates are is the Buddha is describing what a human being is, or what a living being is. Not just human beings, but animals as well. That as a living being, you have 5 things. You have physical form, you have feelings, you have perceptions, which are your views and opinions about the world. You have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. You have free will, and you have a consciousness, which is the mind. So if you understand these 5 aggregates, and you can dive into the more detail, that there's a physical body, there's feelings, there's perceptions, there's volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and there's a consciousness. By understanding this, it actually helps you to practice the first precept that the Buddha shares about not killing a living being. Because by you choosing to kill a living being, now when you kill that living being, you're causing harm, and that harm will come back to you. Because if you went out killing other human beings, for example, people are going to be interested in killing you. People are going to be interested in injuring you. People are going to be interested in arresting you and putting you in jail and things like this, because there's a certain amount of anger and hatred that is in the mind to be able to go out in the world and do that, and people aren't interested in somebody going around killing other beings. So by understanding the 5 aggregates, you can understand that a human being is a living being, that an animal is a living being. But you can also look at something like a bacteria or a virus, and understand that this isn't a living being. Oftentimes we say, I'm going to kill this virus by taking this medicine, or I'm going to kill this bacteria by spraying this spray and cleaning off the counter of my kitchen. But you're not actually killing this living being, because it's not a living being. It's just a bacteria. It's just a virus. It doesn't have all 5 aggregates. It doesn't have physical form. Well, actually it has a little bit of physical form. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have perceptions like views and opinions about the world. It doesn't make choices and decisions. It just spreads through the air or something like that. And it doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. So the Buddha teaches you the way the world is, which is, this is what a living being is, and this is why it would be unwise to kill a living being, because then that harm is going to come back to you. Because in order to create a peaceful and joyful mind, you're going to need to have certain wisdom about not causing harm in the world. If you go out into the world and you cause harm, this harm is going to come back to you. So even though you can't meditate 23 hours a day, let's just say you were somewhere meditating 23 hours a day, locked in a cave, meditating for 23 hours. Well, if you came out 1 hour a day and you went around and you were bitter and harsh and hostile and aggressive with people, you're not enlightened. You can't meditate your way to enlightenment. You need to know other wisdom and other teachings to be able to help you to practice in such a way that you're not causing harm in the world, so harm isn't coming back to you. You're going to need to interact in the world in such a way that you can live harmoniously with all beings. So it's not just meditation that's going to help you to be able to get to enlightenment. You need to know these other things like the 5 aggregates. So this is one of the reasons why you need to know the 5 aggregates, is that it helps you practice the first precept. The other reason why you need to know the 5 aggregates is because you have all 5 of these aggregates. And what an individual will tend to do is they'll tend to cling to these aggregates. We call them aggregates. Some people call them elements, 5 elements, or some people call them 5 collections. These are the 5 things that comprise a living being. Well, if you cling to this physical body, wanting it to be permanent, and now you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle, or you see a gray hair, or you see a mole or a pimple, or you start losing your hair, or you get a little bit of fat here and there, you'll be shaken up because you're holding on to this body, wanting it to be permanent, when in reality it is impermanent. So understanding that your mind has a tendency to cling to these 5 aggregates will help you in life. Same thing with the feelings, that you might have a certain sad feeling or a certain happy feeling, and you might cling to that, wanting that to be permanent. And now if you cling to that happiness, or you cling to that sad feeling, even though you experienced it in the past, now in the present moment, you're having difficulties experiencing peace and joy in the present moment because you're clinging to this feeling or this experience in the past. So the Buddha is teaching you not to cling to these feelings. And then the same thing with your perceptions, certain views and opinions that you have about the world. You might cling to these, wanting other people to view the world in the same way as you. If you've ever been in an argument with somebody, trying to convince them that your view and your opinion is correct and what they're saying is wrong, this is your mind craving or clinging to your views and opinions. And your mind was discontent in that situation. You were angry and frustrated and agitated and annoyed. But if you don't cling to your perceptions, and you realize that you're going to have certain perceptions, other people are going to have different perceptions, and that's okay. That's impermanence. But if you were to cling to your views and opinions or your perceptions, now you're going to have difficulties in your relationships with others. And then there's volitional formations, which are your choices or decisions. And once again, if you cling to these and hold on to them, wanting them to be permanent, you're going to cause yourself discontentedness. So for example, say you had this idea that you would like to travel to Thailand on holiday, right? And say you planned this trip 6 months ago, and you were clinging to this decision to go to Thailand. And now you're so excited about going to Thailand. Well, now if you show up to the airport and your flight's delayed or it's canceled, you'll be frustrated, you'll be irritated because you really want to go to Thailand. You have this craving, this longing, yearning. Or say you show up to the airport and they've closed the airport. Maybe there's some bomb threat, or maybe there's COVID and the planes aren't going anywhere. Or maybe the airline's on strike and you can't even go to Thailand or Australia or some other place that you're going. Well, if you cling to your decision and you really want to go so badly, you're going to be frustrated and irritated. And then there's the conscious consciousness itself, which is the fifth aggregate, the mind, that in the mind there's a certain self-identity that the mind clings to, like I am Italian, or I am Romanian, or I am a Brit, or I am Indian, or I am Chinese, or I am Japanese, or any of these I am, based on your culture, your ethnicity, maybe your sexual orientation, your job or occupation. If you cling to this thinking this is who you are, when somebody says something positive about your nationality, for example, then you'll get pleasant feelings. But then say you're at a restaurant and 2 tables over, they're degrading and disparaging the people of the place where you come from. And now when they say all Americans are blah, 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 blah. Now, if you identify with I am an American, now when they're saying degrading and disparaging things about your nationality or your culture, you're going to get angry or frustrated because you're clinging to the mind. You're clinging to this consciousness, this fifth aggregate, thinking that this is who you are. And the Buddha is reminding you that these things are impermanent, that they're going to produce discontentedness, and that this isn't who you are. This physical form, it's not you. These feelings are not you. The perceptions that you have, that's not who you are. The choices and decisions that you make, that's not you. That's not who you are. And the consciousness or the identity that's in the mind, that's not who you are. So if you can train your mind to let go of these things, which understanding it intellectually is part of that, and you might start to understand that intellectually a little bit now, but then you need to reflect on this and see that it's true, and then you need to practice it. So it's one thing coming to the temple and learning from a teacher about these things, but it's a whole nother thing to be out in the world and you're sitting at that restaurant and you hear 2 tables over, they're degrading people from China or Japan or Lithuania or Italy or Brazil or wherever it is that you're from. It's a whole nother thing to sit there and maintain your calmness and composure. And that's where the training of the mind comes in that the Buddha provides. That's why you have the tools and techniques of something like breathing mindfulness meditation, so that when you notice your mind has moved off your breath, you can cut it off and let it go. Because now when you're sitting in the restaurant and 2 tables over, they're saying something about your nationality or something else that your mind's clinging to. When you notice the painful feelings starting to arise, like the frustration and agitation, you can cut it off and let it go. And you can reside peaceful and joyful. And eventually, if you remove the clinging 100% from your mind, you won't even have the frustration and agitation arise at all. And that's where the mind's fully purified. You can get to the point where you don't even notice any frustration because there's nothing there. There's no cause or condition that is producing this discontentedness to arise. But as long as you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind, you have this clinging where the mind's holding on to any of these 5 aggregates and other things, you will experience discontentedness. That's the unenlightened mind. But by the time you get to enlightenment, all those cravings and clinging has been eliminated, so the mind can be permanently peaceful and joyful. And that's what the training on the path to enlightenment is helping you understand how to do. So this is a bit about what the Buddha is describing here. Do you guys have any questions on this? Yes, sir. Those of you guys online, you can ask questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically and ask any questions that you like.
Can you expand on passing away of perceptions of sensory impingement, the first paragraph?
Oh, the first paragraph. I would need to go back and look at how I describe these attainments, because it's not something that I memorized. I've memorized all the other teachings of the Buddha, but these particular attainments I haven't memorized because they're not experienced by everybody and they're not required to get to enlightenment. So why don't we talk about this after class, or we can talk by private message and I'll help you understand that, because I need to refresh my memory about what those attainments are before I can answer it for you.
Okay. Another question, like how do you perceive space as infinite? Like what is the experience like in daily living when this is what somebody's experience?
Same thing. I need to refresh my memory on this so that I remember what the attainments are, and then I can explain it to you, because what you experience in those attainments versus how it's described as an attainment, they don't actually really match up very well. So I've described what the attainments are, and I probably would describe them or with different labels, but what we're getting in translation is this, and we don't necessarily know that the Buddha said exactly this as these attainments, but when you hear how the attainments are experienced, because I've experienced these attainments, but I don't associate these names to those attainments. So once I refresh my memory, I'll be able to give you better guidance on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me see if we have any questions online here. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So let's move on to the next chapter. Here you can see what you've got is you've got the words of the Buddha from the Pali Canon translated into English. You've got a reference that takes you back to the original Pali Canon, so you can see that it's from the original source. You can build confidence in the books that I'm sharing with you, because you shouldn't believe anything. You shouldn't believe that these books that I share with you are the original words of the Buddha. You can use this reference to go back to the original source and see for yourself. And then you've got words from me that are helping you understand these particular teachings that the Buddha is sharing to help you reflect on these and understand. Each chapter is that way. I'm explaining here what final enlightenment is, or final nibbana. I'm explaining other things here, like what happens at death, what happens to the mind upon death. If someone attains enlightenment, what happens to the mind? Does it disappear? So I'm helping you understand these things. Is the mind and the soul or spirit the same thing? So those are things that you can be gleaning from the book that I don't necessarily have time to go into in a class. So here's chapter 92. Would somebody like to volunteer to read this one? It's about 2.5 pages. Would you like to read? Yeah. If you could get a mic. Siddharth has one there. If you press it, the light will come on, and you just wait a second.
The heavenly beings of the pure abode. Once, monks, I was staying at Ukata in the Sapaka Grove at the foot of a great sal tree. And as I resided there in seclusion, it occurred to me, there is no abode of beings easily accessible that has not been visited by me for so long as that of the heavenly beings of the pure abodes. Suppose I were to visit them now. And then, as swiftly as a strong man might stretch his flexed arm, or flex it again, I vanished from Ukata and appeared among the Aviha heavenly beings. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, it is 91 eons since the Buddha Vipassi appeared in the world, and we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Vipassi, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, it is 31 eons since the Buddha Sikhi appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Sikhi, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, it is in the same 31st eon since the Buddha Vesabu appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Vesabu, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, in this present fortunate eon since the Buddha Kakusanda appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Kakusanda, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, Sir, in this present fortunate eon since the Buddha Konagamana appeared in the world. And we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Konagamana, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here. And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. Then they said, "Sir, in this present fortunate eon since the Buddha Kassapa appeared in the world, and we, sir, who live the holy life with guidance from the Buddha Kassapa, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here." And many thousands of them came to me, saluted me, and stood to one side. They said, "Sir, in this fortunate eon now, the Buddha has arisen in the world. He was born of Khattiya ethnic group and rose in the Khattiya family. He is of the Gotama clan. And we, sir, who have lived the holy life under the Buddha, having freed ourselves from sense desires, have arisen here." Then I went with the Aviha heavenly beings to see the Atapa heavenly beings, and with these to see the Sudasa heavenly beings, and with these to see the Sudasi heavenly beings, and with all of these to see the Akanitha heavenly beings. And there many thousands of heavenly beings came, saluted me, and stood to one side, saying, "Sir, it is 91 eons since the Buddha Vipassi appeared in the world. And so it is, monks, that by his penetration of the fundamentals of the teachings, that the Tathagata remembers the past Buddhas who have attained final Nibbana, final enlightenment, cutting through multiplicity, blazing a trail, have exhausted the round, have passed by all discontentedness. He recalls their births, their names, their clan, their lifespan, their twin disciples, their assemblies of disciples. These fortunate Buddhas were born thus, were called thus, thus was their clan, thus was their morality, their teachings, their wisdom, their residing, thus was their liberation."
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let me share something with you guys on this. I'll share a few things here. This is one of the only conflicts that I've ever seen in the Pali Canon. This thing that we call the Pali Canon, it's a collection of the teachings of the Buddha, the largest collection that we have, dating back about 1,200 years ago, 1,300 years ago. But the Buddha lived over 2,500 years ago. So whatever he taught in terms of his oral tradition, it was an oral tradition during his lifetime. It wasn't written down yet. The technology to write things down existed in China during this time frame, 2,500 years ago, but it hadn't made its way to that part of the world, which today we refer to as Nepal or India. And the technology just hadn't made its way to that area of the world yet. The languages that people spoke during that time frame, it was only an oral language. It wasn't actually, didn't even have a script to write things down because the technology to write things down wasn't there. So they didn't have a need to even have a script for the language. So the teachings of the Buddha were all transmitted orally during his lifetime, and they used chanting as a way to commit them to memory. It wasn't until after his death that the technology had made its way to that part of the world to then be able to write them down and document them. And they documented them, and we refer to that today as the Pali Canon. But since 2,500 years ago until now, these teachings that have been written down, there's a certain amount of impermanence that has affected them because everything around you is impermanent. That's constantly changing. So we know that whatever we have in the Pali Canon isn't 100% of what the Buddha actually taught during his life. We have enough that we can actually get to enlightenment today. You can actually learn and practice and get to enlightenment today, but we don't have every single thing that he ever taught. And this Pali Canon has been through many hands over the last 2,500 years. It's 45 volumes of books that are this thick. So as I've read the various sections of the Pali Canon, and I haven't read it all, but the only conflict that I've ever seen is this, that here you're seeing that the Buddha is documented as having recounted previous Buddhas before him. He's talking about Buddhas that existed prior to him. And then there's another part of the Pali Canon where the Buddha is documented as saying that he is the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path to enlightenment. undeclared before him. And I suspect that that is actually the truth. I don't know that there was any Buddhas before him, but I don't know that there weren't any Buddhas before him either. I wasn't there, so I don't know. I don't have a way to independently verify this. Whether there was Buddhas before him or there wasn't Buddhas before him, it doesn't really matter at this point, because we have his teachings and you can actually learn them and get to enlightenment. But if you understand what it takes to get to enlightenment, the wisdom that you need to cultivate and the language to be able to communicate that wisdom is actually quite detailed. And up to, maybe about, I think it was maybe 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, we weren't really speaking very complicated language. Even 20,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, we surely weren't talking in very complicated language as human beings. Our language was very basic and very rudimentary. But the language that you need in order to get to enlightenment and understand these natural laws is quite detailed. So I suspect that the Buddha, being Gotama Buddha, was the first Buddha, because that was when language had developed to a point where he could communicate the teachings in such a way that human beings could understand them and then actually cultivate the wisdom and actually get to enlightenment. So I don't know that this is actually true, but I don't know that it's necessarily false either, because again, I wasn't there to independently verify it. Whether there was Buddhas before Gotama Buddha, okay, wonderful. There was Buddhas before him. If he was the only Buddha and there wasn't Buddhas before him, okay, wonderful. The goal is now your mind is discontent. You can learn and practice these teachings to be able to get to enlightenment in this life. And one of the things that is being shared here that can actually help you is what they're talking about when they're recounting each individual Buddha, is they're saying that they freed themselves from sensual desire. This is what's at the core of the teachings of a Buddha. That what sensual desire is it's one of those pollutions in the mind, one of the taints or defilements, or we refer to it as the fetters. The Buddha discovered 10 individual fetters or 10 pollutions of the mind. We call it a fetter because what a fetter is it's a shackle that goes around your ankle, and there's a chain and there's a ball. And this is what keeps a prisoner trapped. In ancient times, they would keep a prisoner trapped in this way, stuck in one particular place, where today we have cages and bars. We keep prisoners in cells, in prison cells, where back then they would just put this fetter around their ankle and it would keep them trapped in this particular area. So the Buddha described these 10 pollutions as fetters because it's keeping the unenlightened mind trapped in this continuous cycle of rebirth and in this discontentedness where you're experiencing sadness, anger, frustration, and all these other discontent feelings. So you need to ultimately eliminate all these 10 fetters in order to get to enlightenment. One of the primary fetters is sensual desire. This is where the mind is longing and yearning through the sense spaces, wanting things to be permanently agreeable. What the sense spaces are is this is your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, the body, and the mind itself. We refer to these as the 6 sense spaces. That your mind has sensual desire and it's longing and yearning through the eyes, wanting to see permanently agreeable things. And when you see things that are agreeable to you, you get pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But then when you see things that you disagree with, you get painful feelings like sadness, anger, frustration, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and things like this. And the same thing is happening with your ears in terms of certain things you hear. If you hear something agreeable, you get pleasant feelings. If you hear something disagreeable, you get painful feelings. So say you're at a stoplight in your car and someone pulls up with music that you like. It's like, oh yeah, that's my jam. Yeah, all right, let's have some fun. That's some good music. But then you go up to another traffic light and someone pulls up to you with a different type of music. And you're like, oh man, you get really frustrated and agitated. This is because your mind's craving. You have sensual desire where you're longing and yearning through these sense spaces, wanting things to be permanently agreeable. But yet you live in an impermanent world. It's not possible for you to hear sounds that are permanently agreeable because things are constantly changing. Like, for example, we were meditating and it was kind of quiet there for a little bit. And then the dogs started barking. Whereas if you were craving permanent silence and then the dogs barked, you might have been frustrated or annoyed because you were hearing something that was disagreeable to you. But that quietness that we experienced, that was impermanent, and that's why we heard the sound of the dogs barking. But then also the sound of the dogs barking is also impermanent. Right now, you don't hear them barking because it's impermanent. So all these things around you are impermanent. But what the unenlightened mind is doing when it has sensual desire is it's craving permanence through these sense spaces, wanting things to be permanently agreeable to you. And when you get what you want, you get pleasant feelings. When you don't get what you want, you get painful feelings. And this is the mind going up and down and up and down. So one of the core central teachings of a Buddha is to eliminate sensual desire, where your mind is no longer longing, yearning through your sense spaces, wanting things to be permanently agreeable. That you understand that the things around you are impermanent and you're no longer craving permanent contact through the sense spaces that is going to be agreeable to you. That by the time you eliminate sensual desire, you don't see it as agreeable or disagreeable. It's just a sound. Right? The dog's barking is just a sound. It's not agreeable or disagreeable. It's just a sound. Or that music, it's not agreeable or disagreeable music. It's just music. It's just a sound. That's all it is. But when you have craving in your mind, you'll have certain likes and you'll have certain dislikes in terms of things you see, things you hear, things you smell, things you taste, like certain foods. You have certain foods you like and certain foods you dislike. And if you get that food on your tongue, it's like, you're repulsed by it. But what you're doing is you're training the mind to no longer do this. And the same thing with contact with the body. Like say you're walking down the street and you're just walking down the street. This might be agreeable to you. But now somebody bumps into you with their shoulder. Hey, man, what are you doing? Why are you bumping into me, right? That might be disagreeable to you, right? So this is what the mind is doing. And then there's the mind itself, that you might be thinking about things in the past that you've experienced in the past, and it might be causing painful feelings now in the present moment because your mind's clinging to this experience from the past. Or there might be certain things in the future that your mind's longing and yearning for, either pleasurable things or painful things. And now in the present moment, you're experiencing either pleasant feelings or painful feelings based on the mind longing and yearning for something in the future. So you can eliminate all of this through eliminating the central desire in the mind. So even though this chapter is documenting what appears to be the Buddha recounting previous Buddhas, I will help you to understand the central desire, because that's what's really going to help you to get to enlightenment, is understanding that. Whether there was Buddhas before that Buddha or not, it doesn't really matter at this point. So do you guys have any questions on this chapter? Yes, Edmund.
Thank you, David. Could you say a little more?
It's still on. It's still on, Edmund. It's just impermanence. The signal will cut out for like a half a second, and it'll make you think that it's off, but it's actually still on.
Okay, thank you. Attachment and aversion seem like two sides of the same coin. It's dukkha and it's discontentedness. But the quality of both feels very different to me. Attachment and craving, however difficult that may be, personally, I suppose speaking, it doesn't feel like the challenge of aversion to mental states, mental thoughts, historic. I suppose I tend to look back more than forward. Maybe I'm a more sensitive to aversion than craving and attachment that way. Could you say a little bit more about, so much of the teaching I'm seeing, free from sense desires. It seems to be the desirous life that the Buddha spoke of most, and less about the aversion,
Yeah, so it's actually because of the craving that you have aversion. If it wasn't for the craving, the aversion wouldn't be there. But because the mind wants to be permanently pleased, then it's averse to the things that it sees as disagreeable to it. So I can give you examples if you like. Okay, I'll give you some examples. So the music one is an example, right? You're like at a stoplight, you hear you have contact through the ears, and then the mind is aware of that music, And now you see that music as agreeable to you based on your cravings, based on your longing and yearning. And now when you hear music that is opposite of your craving, that's where the aversion comes in, and now you want to push that away. But it's because of the craving that the aversion is still there. If the craving wasn't there, it's just a sound. It's not either agreeable or disagreeable to you. And the same thing's happening with all these other sense bases. Like if you walk past a flower shop and you smell a certain odor, it's like, oh, wow, that's really pleasant. Wow, I really like that. It's such a great smell. Or maybe some perfume or cologne or something like this that you smell as you're walking through the mall. Well, then when you're walking on the street and that odor of the sewer comes up into your nose, now you're repulsed by it. And it's like, that's so horrible. The mind just doesn't understand these things are all impermanent. All these experiences are impermanent. It's craving that odor that you find agreeable to be permanent. It's craving and longing and yearning, clinging to that, wanting it to be permanent. And now when you smell this other odor that you consider to be repulsive or disagreeable, you're repulsed by it. That's the aversion part of it. So the same thing's happening with every single sense base, and you can see throughout your life. And if you're not aware of this now and you can't look back, you should be able to look back and be able to see this based on your direct experiences. But now even going forward, you can see this, that the mind is doing the same thing. Even like the temperature, I don't know how you guys feel. I'm kind of trying to adjust the temperature to keep it at a kind of a moderate temperature here, but sometimes it can be too hot or too cold, and the mind can be repulsed by this based on its cravings. And everybody's going to have a different temperature that feels comfortable. But if you don't have a craving, you can be content and joyful and peaceful no matter what the temperature is. But sometimes if it's too hot or it's too cold, somebody could get frustrated or agitated or annoyed because of those kinds of things. But by the time you eliminate your craving, it's just a temperature. It doesn't affect the condition of the mind because you're not forming your inner feelings based on some condition. The central desire is the heart of those conditioned feelings that we talk about, the discontentedness, the pleasant, painful, neither painful nor pleasant, that the mind is forming its inner feelings based on some condition. That if you see with your eyes that it's sunny outside, now the mind experiences pleasant feelings. But now if you see it rains with your eyes, now you get those painful feelings. But if you just understand that the weather is impermanent, and sometimes it's going to be sunny, sometimes it's going to rain, you don't need to form your inner feelings based on whether it's sunny or whether it's raining. You can just maintain your peace and joy no matter what the weather is. So there's all these different things that you're experiencing contact through the sense bases, that if you have craving, you're going to have pleasant feelings in some situations because you're forming that inner feeling based on the condition. And in other situations, you're going to be repulsed, or you're going to have anger, agitation, or annoyance. But when you get rid of those cravings, you get rid of the mind forming its inner feelings based on some condition. Now you can just be peaceful and joyful in any situation, whether it's sunny, whether it's raining, whether it's flowers and cologne or an odor from the sewer, whether somebody bumps into you or not. And you can just maintain your joy because you know all these things are just impermanent, and you're not going to be able to experience permanently agreeable things.
Thanks. It's. I was just thinking about, sometimes people, you can see people, they're stuck in a job that's awful, but they'll be stuck in it for maybe decades. Then they go home to a relationship that's broken and things like that. It just seems that an unhappiness can stay. People can almost stay in an unhappy situation and know that somehow over the horizon there is a better way to live and there's better options or something like that. But I suspect it kind of comes back to wisdom again, maybe having greater wisdom to understand that. I'm not sure, but that analogy, the guy's walking down the road and he sees a fella sitting on the side of the road beating himself on the head with a hammer. And he says to him, "Why are you doing that?" He says, "Because it feels so great when I stop it." That kind of thing. And I often wonder that kind of thing. I see people, and I've felt it myself, to be able to stay in a difficult situation. And it's like almost like an attachment to an aversion or something.
So because of the clinging, because of the attachment in those examples that you gave, like working at a job that you feel miserable at, this is somebody clinging. They're clinging to something. They're either clinging to the location where they're working, they're clinging to the company, they're clinging to the coworkers, they're clinging to the salary, they're clinging to something, right? There might be multiple things that they're holding on to, and they are feeling stuck in this job, but they're really not. It's just that their mind is holding on to it, and they don't have the wisdom to train the mind to let go. Or like in a relationship that's otherwise unhealthy, and they go home to that relationship each day, then their mind is stuck. They feel stuck, but it's really the clinging or the attachment that's keeping them stuck. So that's what the real power in understanding the teachings of the Buddha is, that when you understand what the mind's doing and that you can choose to let go and you can choose to move on to something better, then this is very empowering to the mind. So as long as somebody doesn't understand this wisdom, they will feel that they're stuck, and they will create this very difficult life for themselves because of the lack of wisdom. Not only are they clinging in those situations, but they're probably clinging in other situations. They probably have moral conduct that's very unwise, right? They're maybe very disgruntled and agitated in their speech and in their actions. And this person just feels miserable, right? They feel all this displeasure, but you can eliminate that by training the mind, by purifying the mind and making different decisions. But people just don't realize that this is a possibility for them. So this is one of the benefits of coming to a place like Thailand, whether it's your holiday or whether you're just here to live for a period of time. You now have access to teachings that you otherwise didn't have access to, where all of us, I think, or none of us grew up here in Thailand. We didn't grow up in a Buddhist country like Thailand, so we didn't get exposure to these teachings. So we've improved the ability for us to be able to now understand this by coming in contact with a group of people who do know these teachings, like the Thai people. And now when you learn these, then you can experience improved results by training your mind and cultivating the mind to experience more and more peace and joy. Okay, any other questions on this one? Yes, ma'am. The mic on the floor behind you still on. Yeah, that one right there. I think it's still on. You guys can keep those mics with you, because then if you need it again, you've got it.
What's about people who are trying to annoy you or pushing you down, and how do you have to react? Because I'm a person, I don't want to, let's say, do pain to somebody. Mm-hmm. So when I had the sexual harassment, I didn't react. It was like, okay, I'm really, really angry now, but I just spoke to this person. Mm-hmm. But it's like inside me, I want to really to hate him, and I sometimes asking me, would this be the better reaction, so that I have respect for these people, so that they know, okay, no, that way. In general, when I don't react, they think, okay, it's okay, we can do what we want. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also with words in general.
Yeah. So the goal is to train your mind to not react, but instead to respond to the situation. You need to be able to respond in each situation. A reaction is usually like something that is not well thought out, and you're just reacting, and you probably are going to do that in an unwise way that produces unwholesome results for you. So if you reacted maybe by hitting this person or slamming them to the ground or something like that, that's going to produce unwholesome results for you. Whereas if you respond in a situation, now you've thought it out and with more and more wisdom about what would be wise and unwise, your response will be more informed, and it will be a wiser response that will then produce wholesome results. And sometimes the response is to walk away and ignore it. But sometimes when there's an ego in there, you might not feel comfortable to walk away. The mind will want to stand up and fight. This is the animalistic instincts, where the human mind, it's a human being, but the mind has been conditioned through many animal existences. So the human mind oftentimes functions like an animal, where an animal will react. When something happens that an animal doesn't like, it will growl and roar and try to fear that other animal into doing what it wants you to do. But as a human being, if you growl and roar, then people just are aggressive and hostile and bitter back to you. So what you would like to do is respond in a certain situation, and each situation is different. So I couldn't give you one specific thing to always do that's going to always be fitting for that situation, because the variables are going to be different in each situation, and you're going to need to have wisdom to discern what would be the wisest decision. So I can share with you, oftentimes it's best to walk away. I can share that with you. I can share with you that it's wise to maintain your calmness and composure, because with your calm mind, then you'll be able to access your wisdom and make wise decisions about how to stop this situation from occurring. And there may be a situation where you do need to physically defend this body, right? If somebody was coming at you physically and they're trying to cause this body harm, you might need to cause them harm back in order to defend this body, because it wouldn't be very wise to just sit there and let someone beat you up, for example. But you would like to do as least amount of harm as possible just to get this harm to stop occurring. And that harm is coming to that person based on their decision to cause harm. You haven't gone out looking to cause harm. You're just defending this body. So that's the difference. And that's why you won't experience unwholesome results if you're causing harm in order to protect this body. You're just defending this body. You're not intentionally going out looking for a fight. You're just maybe in your house, and at 2 a.m. in the morning, someone breaks into the house. They're not bringing you chocolate and flowers. They're there to do harm, right? So you need to defend this body, but you do that with as least amount of harm as possible. And if possible, you just get out of the house. But in all situations, that's not going to be the right solution, because you might look out your window and there's a gang of people outside, and it would be unwise to get out of the house. But in another situation, you look out, there's nobody outside. If someone broke into your house, it might be better to just leave. Call the police. They have the tools, the techniques, the wisdom to handle that situation. But in other situations, you might be backed up against the corner and you might need to get a weapon or something like this. And that's where each situation is going to be different. And if you understand your goal is to cause the least amount of harm as possible in that situation and respond to this, then you'll make the wise decision by maintaining your calmness and composure. Then you'll be able to access your wisdom. So the Buddha doesn't give you like a decision tree of like, if this happens, do that. And if this happens, do that. Because that would be like a permanent answer, and it's not possible. But with cultivating your mind, with training your mind, with eliminating these pollutions, you'll come up with the wise decision that's wise in any given situation, because you'll know these natural laws very clearly. You'll make wise decisions that produce wholesome results.
My feeling is when I'm really calm, I'm really like, okay, if somebody's going to say something to me, I just don't answer and I just stay in my calmness. I try at least. But I realize sometimes they see like, yeah, I'll say it, they can do everything they want. They can say everything they want because I'm not reacting. Mm-hmm. But I don't want, because it's for me, okay, it does make sense to react. I want to stay in my peace. I don't want to this emotion they have, like, I don't know, they might be angry with frustration and they want to, or they are going to spread this frustration to me. So it's not me the problem, but they have their own problem, but they just spread it to me.
Yeah. So the Buddha refers to this as protecting your own contentedness. You need to protect your own contentedness. You need to guard the doorways of discontentedness. You need to guard these 6 doorways, right? So someone can say anything they would like to say to me. I'm not going to be upset by it. That's their words. That's affecting them. It's not affecting me. This is a really simple lesson my grandmother taught me when I was a kid. The Buddha is essentially teaching the same thing, but this is grandma's words. You might have heard this before. She says, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Right? So somebody can say whatever they would like to say. If you don't have a craving in your mind that everybody has to talk to you polite, kind, friendly, respectful, if your mind's craving that everyone talks to you polite, kind, friendly, respectful, when someone says something disrespectful, you'll be upset because you're craving this permanence. But if you understand impermanence, that Most people are going to talk to you polite, kind, friendly, respectful, but occasionally you're going to have someone that talks disrespectful to you. This is impermanence, and you can't stop that. You can't stop what other people are doing. You could try to go around the world and teach everyone to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful, but there's 8 billion people in the world. You're not going to be able to do that. But you can train your mind to not crave permanence, that you understand that some people are going to be polite and respectful and other people aren't. And while you choose to be around polite people, right, you choose to be around polite and respectful people, that's your choice. But eventually you're going to come in contact with someone who's disrespectful, and you just don't react and you respond. And your response might be you just walk away, and then you protect your contentedness. So easy. But it's challenging when you have craving in your mind. So that's why you would like to work on the mind and train the mind to eliminate these cravings, so you're not craving permanence.
Yeah, because I walk away, but after at home I'm really, really angry, and it's like I'm getting crazy because I want to react, but I don't want to harm somebody.
Yeah.
So, or even with words, that's why.
Well, it's better to be quietly frustrated than overtly angry and hostile and bitter. Because when you're overtly angry, hostile, and bitter, you're putting out harm through your intentions, your speech, and your actions, and that harm's going to come back to you. But if you're just quietly frustrated, at least you're just dealing with that internally, and you got to get rid of it. But eventually, when you get rid of your cravings, desires, attachments, you won't even have that quiet frustration anymore. Your mind will just remain peaceful and joyful. And you'll be able to see that occurring as you train your mind. You need to learn what's called the Eightfold Path. This is the core central teaching of the Buddha. And I teach this in all the various programs that I teach because it's so central. It's the path to enlightenment. Without understanding the Eightfold Path, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment. So there's certain teachings in there that you don't know right now. Based on what I know about you, you don't know that teaching yet. And when you learn that, it includes meditation, but it includes other things as well, where you learn how to cut off any discontentedness that's coming up in the mind. So you can learn this through the books, the audiobooks, the videos, the podcast, the various courses and retreats that I teach. You can learn the Eightfold Path, and this is what you need to really support you in those moments where you're experiencing these kinds of things, so that then you can not only address it in the moment, but you also have proactive training, that you're proactively training the mind so that in the moment you will experience less and less frustration, less and less irritation. And eventually you'll get to a point where those situations will occur and you'll just smile, and you'll know that it's these teachings that are leading to the improvement in your mind. Because in the past you would have gotten so frustrated and angry, but now it's like, whoa, look at that, the mind's like so peaceful. Wow, the Buddhist teachings really work. So you just need to learn that core central teaching, which you haven't learned yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we'll look at one more chapter here. I don't see any questions anywhere else. All right, let's see. This one, I don't know that we're going to read this one. This one is going through a bunch of different cosmology of the teachings of the Buddha. I don't know that we necessarily need to read that one. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, I think that we can learn this one. Let's see, 2.5 pages. Let's end on this one. Would somebody like to read this one, chapter 96? Sure, go ahead, Edmund.
4 observable benefits for one who learned the teachings by ear. Monks, when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view, 4 benefits are to be observed. What 4? Here, a monk masters the teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones recite passages of the teachings to him. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the first benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, among masters of teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verse-inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, but a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, this is the teachings, the discipline in which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man were skilled in the sound of a kettle drum. While travelling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a kettle drum and would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a kettle drum. So too, a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the second benefit to be observed when one has followed the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, among masters of teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has learned those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There, the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor does a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, a young heavenly being teaches the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. It occurs to him, these are the teachings and discipline in which I formerly lived the spiritual life. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose a man was skilled in the sound of a conch. While travelling along a highway, he might hear the sound of a conch and would not be at all confused or uncertain about the sound. Rather, he would conclude, that is the sound of a conch. So too, among masters the teachings, the arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the third benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. Again, among masters of teachings, discourses, mixed prose and verse, expositions, verses, inspired spoken phrases, quotations, birth stories, amazing accounts, and questions and answers. He has practiced those teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. He passes away muddled in mind and is reborn into a certain group of heavenly beings. There the happy ones do not recite passages of the teachings to him, nor does a monk with psychic potency who has attained mastery of mind teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings, nor does a young heavenly being teach the teachings to an assembly of heavenly beings. However, one being who has been spontaneously reborn reminds another who has been spontaneously reborn. Do you remember, dear sir? Do you remember where we formerly lived the spiritual life? The other says, I remember, dear sir. I remember the arising of his memory. I remember the arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. Suppose there were two friends who had played together in the mud. By chance they would meet one another later in life. Then one friend would say to the other, do you remember this friend? Do you remember that friend? And the other would say, I remember, friend, I remember. So too a monk masters the teachings. The arising of his memory is sluggish, but then that being quickly reaches distinction. This is the fourth benefit to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view. These are the four benefits to be observed when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally, examined them with the mind, and penetrated them well by view.
Okay, thank you, Edmund. So what the Buddha is teaching here is that when you're learning and practicing the teachings in this life, if for some reason you don't get to enlightenment and you're reborn in another realm, here he's referring to the heavenly realm, that you're going to still have memory of these teachings. And then with those residual memories, you're able to then learn a little bit more of the teachings and then ultimately get to enlightenment. Some people are taught that the heavenly realm is permanent, that you have just one life, that you get to the end of this life and somebody judges you and you either go to a good place or a bad place and that place is permanent. This isn't actually true, because you can see around the world, everything around you is impermanent, including these realms: hell, animal, afflicted spirit, human realm, and the heavenly realm. They're all impermanent. So even beings in the heavenly realm, they're still in the cycle of rebirth, and they need to escape that and get out of that. So they still need to get to enlightenment in order to get out of the cycle of rebirth. So in this heavenly realm, it's possible for a being to have been a human previously, having learned these teachings, and now being reborn in that realm, to be able to then get to enlightenment from that realm. That's what the Buddha is teaching you. And you can have the same situation, like say you've been human before, you've learned these teachings, and say you're reborn back into the human world. You can have residual memories of these teachings from your past lives, and now in this life it kind of makes it a little bit easier for you to get to enlightenment because you've had these residual memories from your past lives. What the Buddha is teaching you here is to learn, reflect, and practice the teachings. This is what he taught during his lifetime, is that you need to investigate his teachings. You need to examine them. So you're learning when he says, when one has learned the teachings by ear, recited them verbally. That's the learning part. During the lifetime of the Buddha, they recited them verbally. So what we would say is learn the teachings, consult the books, consult the videos, consult the podcast, get help from your teacher to be able to understand the teachings. That's the investigation part. That's the learning. During his lifetime, they would recite the teachings orally because they didn't have books and videos and podcasts and things like that. Then when the Buddha says examine them with the mind, what he's talking about is reflecting on these teachings, independently verifying them. He used to tell people, come examine my teachings, come verify them, because he knew if you came and examined his teachings close enough, you would see that they're true and they lead to your enlightenment. He never said, just believe me. He said just the opposite. He said, come investigate my teachings, come examine them, and then reflect on them, or examine them with the mind so that you can independently verify that they're true. Or you might discover that they're false, but I guarantee you, if you study the teachings that I share with you from the original words of the Buddha, they're not false. They lead exactly where he said they do, to this peaceful and joyful mental state. But you need to be able to see that for yourself. Me knowing that they're the truth and that they are going to lead to your enlightenment isn't necessarily helpful to you. It is because you have someone that has confidence in the teachings to guide you, but you need to develop the wisdom. And the way you do that is through reflection on the teachings to verify that they're true. But then you practice the teachings. That's penetrating them well by view. You penetrate into the teachings and you start practicing them. So, for example, the Buddha teaches not to have argumentative speech and not to speak harshly and to speak gently, and these other teachings around speech. So you learn it, you reflect on it, and you're like, yeah, if I talk to my mom more gently, that probably would be pretty good. And if I talk to her gently and I talk to my dad gently, we would actually probably have a better relationship. Yeah, the Buddha's probably right there. But now you take it into your practice. You start practicing it. When you're on the phone with your mom or your dad, or you're spending time with your mom and dad, you start learning how to speak more gentle, more polite, more respectful in these situations. And now when you're talking that way and you see your relationship improve with your family members and your friends and your coworkers, you'll know the truth. That when you learn what the Buddha taught around speech, for example, you learn it, you reflect on it, and you practice it, you've penetrated it well by view, you can see the truth for yourself, that you've acquired this wisdom that, yes, the Buddha has described the natural laws of existence. And when you function this way as a human being, you're experiencing better and better results to the condition of your mind and in your life, that you're noticing your life becoming more peaceful and more joyful, because as you're being more and more peaceful to the people around you, more and more peace and more joy is coming back to you. As you're being more and more loving and kind and friendly and respectful, more and more of those things are coming back to you, because that's the way you're treating others. But right now, if you have people around you that are bitter and harsh and hostile, That's probably because you're bitter, harsh, and hostile in those situations. And as long as you keep putting out bitterness and hostility and aggression in those relationships, that's what's going to keep coming back to you. So you're going to need to improve your practice by training your mind. And as you do, you'll see your relationships slowly improve. So it's this process of learning, reflecting, and practicing that's going to lead to your wisdom and the transformation of your mind. And that's what the Buddha is essentially talking about here in relationship to the human realm, or in relationship to the heavenly realm. But he talks about this in relationship to the human realm and other places too in his teachings. He talks about how you can accomplish the same thing, where you can experience these benefits of having learned the teachings, and then they just make sense to you. Some people, when they learn these teachings with me, even though they've never learned them before, as I'm speaking, they're like, this just makes so much sense. You almost feel like you've learned this before in the past. And there's some people who learn with me that it's a real struggle. It's really hard because they haven't necessarily learned about these teachings in the past. So if you've noticing that as you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, they're pretty straightforward and easy for you to understand, there could be the potential that you learned them in the past, but nonetheless, you still need to learn them in this life. Because having not learned them, you experience what the Buddha says, passing away muddle-minded. When he talks about this muddle-mindedness, he's talking about lack of concentration. That when your mind's polluted with those 10 pollutions, those 10 fetters, you're going to find that you have a lack of focus, a lack of concentration. You're going to have trouble with your memory. If you have these kinds of things, this is just because your mind is polluted with these 10 pollutions, these fetters. You're not a bad person. Your brain isn't defective or anything like that. It's just that your mind is polluted with these 10 pollutions, these 10 fetters. When you uproot these pollutions out of the mind, not only does the mind become more peaceful and joyful, but you'll notice focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory coming into the mind because you've uprooted these pollutions out of the mind. And this will help you in all parts of your life, whether it's your personal life or your professional life. You'll be able to function with a more optimized mind. One of the ways the Buddha was explaining this is if you think about a musical instrument. Let's say we have a stringed instrument like a guitar or something like that. If you have the string too loose and you pluck the guitar, the music doesn't sound like the way it's intended to sound. The instrument isn't playing the way it's intended to play because the string's too loose and you pluck the string and the instrument doesn't play the way it's intended to play. It's like, but also if you tune the string too tight and you pluck it, it's not going to play beautiful music there either. The instrument's not playing the way it's intended to play. So your mind is exactly the same way as if you hold on to things too tight, your mind's not going to function optimally. But over here, if you're too loose and you're indifferent and you're dull and lethargic, your mind's not going to perform well there either. So what you're doing on this path to enlightenment is you're fine-tuning the mind. You're bringing that guitar string to the perfect tension. So now when you pluck it, it plays beautiful music the way the guitar was intended to play. And your mind is the same way. When you bring it to the middle by uprooting these pollutions, it'll function the way it's intended to function. You'll get this brightness, this radiance, this deep memory, the focus, the concentration. You'll be able to see that in the mind. But otherwise, the mind's going to experience this muddle-mindedness or this lack of concentration. So if you're experiencing that now, it's not permanent. It's just that your mind is experiencing the pollutions of your mind. You can train your mind to uproot those pollutions and experience the focus and concentration and clarity in your mind. And it just means that you need to decide that you're done with the anger, you're done with the frustration, you're done with the irritation, you're done with those painful feelings, and you'd like to experience something different. And then the Buddha's teachings are there to help you figure out how to do that. And then you have a teacher like me to be able to help you and guide you along the way. So this is what I was going to share with you guys today. Sometimes we cover 3 chapters, sometimes we cover 5, sometimes we cover 10. When I teach this at home in the evenings, I be sure that I cover all 10 chapters, but usually here there's more discussion. So we usually just kind of cover whatever we can cover up to 11 o'clock. But let me see if you guys have any questions on this particular teaching. Anyone here or online, if you guys have questions, you're welcome to ask those. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let me just click over here. So what I'll do then is just end class by thanking all of you for coming to join and decide that today's the day you'd like to learn some of the teachings of the Buddha, because as you train your mind, it's helping you, it's helping those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity, because you're becoming more peaceful and more joyful and more wise. So it's helping you, it's helping the people around you, and it's helping all of humanity. So I have a lot of admiration when people decide that they would like to do this inner work to improve your mind, because the teachings of the Buddha are to heal from what hurt you so that you never ever need to hurt ever again. You can get to the point where you never experience any painful feelings ever again, and it just comes through learning and growing your practice. You can attend regular classes here at the temple or online. Tomorrow I'm going to be teaching in the traditional style of learning. That's our group learning program on Sundays. Tomorrow the topic is misunderstandings of the teachings of the Buddha. I'm going to be showing you certain things that you'll see in the Buddhist world that people are misunderstanding his teachings, because I will share with you that the Buddha taught that there are no rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship in the teachings of the Buddha. But when you go out into Buddhist temples, sometimes one of the first things you see is rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. So I'm going to show you how this is untrue, and you're not going to believe me about these things. I'm going to show you how to learn, how to reflect, and how to practice so that you know the truth for yourself, that these rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, for example, aren't the teachings of the Buddha. And there's other things that I'm going to share with you too as well. But this chapter that I'm going to be teaching you, I'm going to be teaching it to you in the traditional style, where I'm going to be teaching and teaching and teaching 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then opening up to any questions that you guys have. This is volume 1, chapter 24, because we're coming to the end of the group learning program, and then we're going to restart it on March 17th from the very beginning. And you can attend here at the temple, or you can attend online if you'd like, no matter where you are in the world. We have Zoom, we have Facebook, YouTube, we have a podcast. So you can learn these teachings slowly but surely. And students join this group learning program at any time. You don't necessarily have to start at the beginning, but because we're getting ready to restart, a lot of students will start at the beginning. Sometimes they come in at the end like this and kind of get used to learning in the group learning program. And then when it's time to restart, they're right there, ready to learn. They've attended a few classes already. So if you guys would like to come tomorrow, either here at the temple or online, you can learn this topic. And we start with meditation. And I teach this at 9 a.m. here at the temple, and I teach at home at 9 p.m. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing a guided meditation with students, and then opening up to any and all questions that you guys have, just kind of free-form questions about anything that people would like to ask questions about. So thank you for joining, whether you're here at the temple or you're online. Thank you for attending our class, and perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. Sawadee khap. Sawadee khap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.